I'm back at it again, folks. I got myself a bunch of pad controllers and I'm going to test out for their pad sensitivity. So if you're a finger drummer and you want your money to end up in the right place, keep watching. The quest for groove. So first things first, there's two very important things you have to know before we can move on with the rest of the test. The first thing is that my recommendations change pretty frequently because, you know, technology evolves all the time. So make sure you look at the description and you look at the comments below for updates. And also check out my kit.com page, kit.com/questforgroove. I'm going to put all the gear that I like, all the gear that I recommend right now. I'm going to put that on my kit.com page, which is always up to date. So make sure to check that out. The second thing is I already did a video about pad sensitivity about 2 months ago. And what I'm going to do in this video is the main question I want to answer is, does any of these devices change my standing recommendation that I made in that video 2 months ago? And the conclusion of that video was that if you wanted the best pads, the most sensitive, responsive pads, regardless of price, you would have to buy a Maschine Mk3, a big Maschine Mk3, or an Akai MPC Live. So this is the Akai MPC Live. It's a big standalone device from Akai. Both devices have great pads, but they're pretty pricey. If you're more on a budget, the first thing I would recommend is the Maschine Mikro Mk3. The pads are not exactly the same sensitivity as its big brother, but they're still very good and it's great value for money. Then for people who are even more on a budget, I would get the Presonus Atom. This is a $150 device. Yeah, great value for money. Let me quickly walk you through all the devices that I'm going to test today. The first one is the Arturia Beatstep, the normal Arturia Beatstep, not the Pro. The McMillan QuNeo, the Akai LPD8, small mini budget controller. Then in the same range, the Korg Nanopad 2, also a small budget controller. Both launch pads, so we have the Novation Launchpad Mk3, the normal launchpad, but also the Launchpad Pro. A Roger Linn design Linnstrument, a McMillan Boppad. Then I have the IK Multimedia iRig pads, and over here is the much requested Ableton Push 2. So I'm going to test out all these controllers. I actually already tested them out last week. What I did is I spent an afternoon just playing each and every one of these devices, try and play the beats that I'm familiar with, use my style of finger drumming, and then I would move back and forth between the devices. So I would plug in the QuNeo, then I would plug in the iRig, plug in the QuNeo again, and then I would also compare all of these with the top devices that I recommended last time, right? I would plug in my Maschine Mk3 and see, like, is this thing still better? I would plug in the Atom and see, is there another budget device that's actually better than the Atom? So that was more or less the testing process. So let's start off by getting a few devices out of the way that I would not recommend you buying at this time. The first one is the McMillan QuNeo and the iRig pads. Both of these are standard 4x4 16 pad devices, and they're just as expensive or just as cheap as the Presonus Atom. So Presonus Atom is way better. So both of these are kind of disqualified because you can get better stuff for your money. Let's get rid of these. Other devices that I would not recommend are all of these small ones. So the Nanopad 2, the Arturia Beatstep, and the Akai LPD8. For most stuff, you will need 16 pads, but I figured if you have two of these nano pads, you might be able to use them side by side, right? So one underneath your right hand and one underneath your left hand, and then you could still play some stuff. And I tried doing that, but none of these pads is very good. And considering that you might need two of them in order to get the most out of, you know, your finger drumming, you're getting into the range of the Presonus Atom, and the Presonus Atom is just has great pads for the money, for $150. So all of these dismissed. And then finally, I'm going to dismiss the Novation Launchpad Mk3, the normal Novation Launchpad. I did like the Launchpad Pro. I'm going to talk about that later. But the normal Launchpad, the pads, no, they really aren't that great. So let's get rid of this one. And now we're left with the controllers that I actually did like one way or the other. The McMillan Boppad, the Roger Linn design Linnstrument, the Launchpad Pro, and the Ableton Push 2. So let's go talk about those. Let's start off with the Ableton Push 2. I really liked this controller. The pads are great. I actually moved back and forth between the Push 2 and my Maschine Mk3. And while I liked my Maschine Mk3 pads a little bit better than the Ableton Push 2 pads in terms of sensitivity and playability. I also realized that that might just have something to do with what I'm used to. I'm used to the velocity curve that the Maschine Mk3 makes, and I'm not used to the Push 2. I'm also not used to the smaller pads. But I think if you have a Push 2, you can probably just make it work for any type of finger drumming. So you don't really need to buy another device like a Maschine Mk3 or an Akai MPC Live. I don't think you need to do that. So a Push 2 is a great alternative for a high-end pad controller. It also has a high-end price. I think it's $600 as well. But if you're like an Ableton user and you're planning on using this thing for more than just finger drumming, also for controlling Ableton or for playing chords or stuff like that, because that's something you can do on these types of controllers with more pads, right? You can also play melodies and scales and chords. So if that has your interest, Ableton Push 2 is something to consider. The second device that I liked a lot was the Novation Launchpad Pro. I like the pads. They're sensitive, or at least they're sensitive enough. I think they're comparable to the Presonus Atom. They might be a little bit less sensitive than the Presonus Atom, to be honest. But the Launchpad obviously has this thing going where they have 64 pads, 8x8. So I think this decision whether you buy a Launchpad Pro or a Presonus Atom is, first of all, the Launchpad Pro is a little bit more expensive. I think it's over $200. And then secondly, it's also, if you really want to go for good pads and you don't need more than 16 pads and you just want to play drums, then I would get a Presonus Atom. But if you're planning on also playing chords and some scales and stuff like that, then a Launchpad Pro is a very good entry-level device into finger drumming. You can also play all the basic finger drumming stuff on it. So, you know, that's kind of the consideration that you have to make. But I'm going to keep this one just for fun, because I would like to mess around with it a little bit more. And then we have the McMillan Boppad. This is another device that I liked. It's a bit of a strange beast. It has 4 pads, 4 quadrants that you can set to different sounds. And for most finger drumming things, I would not recommend you getting this thing, because 4 pads is not enough, right? I like the 16 pad layout. It's how I structure all my lessons, around a 16 pad 4x4 layout. So if you're, you know, getting into finger drumming and you want to kind of follow along with the stuff I teach, then don't get this thing. But I wanted to mention it, and I wanted to tell you why I think it is good, and it is a fun thing. The sensitivity is wonderful. It responds wonderfully, basically on par with the Push 2 and the Maschine Mk3 and the Akai MPC Live. So McMillan, great job. Way better than the QuNeo controller. Then the quadrants have this thing where you can also, besides a note, you can also set some controller data depending on where you hit a quadrant. And I kind of like that, because in addictive drums, you can, for example, set this pad to a hi-hat, but then you can set the controller data so that this is a closed hi-hat, and then the hi-hat opens up when you move further to the edge. So that was kind of cool. So I changed this thing into some sort of a breakbeat setup where I would just have a kick over here, hi-hat over here, and a snare over here, and nothing over here. And then I would just play like, right? Something like that. And then whenever I wanted to open the hi-hat, I would go like, right? You open it up. And that was fun, but that's basically where I ran into a problem, because whenever I would move from here to there, it would take one extra tap before I would hear the open hi-hat sound. So, and then that just completely threw me off, because whenever I move to the place where I want to hear an open hi-hat, it should be there when I hit it, not one tap afterwards. Same goes the other way around. I had this open hi-hat, wanted to move back to a closed one, and you would hear one open hi-hat, and then you would hear a closed one. So yeah, if that would not have been the case, I would have kept this thing, and I would have kind of used this as some sort of a minimalistic device that would challenge me and force me to kind of look at my drum parts in a different way with only 4 sounds, and it would have been this source of inspiration. But because that thing doesn't quite work, I think I'm gonna return it. But still, great job. Maybe a firmware update or a version 2 of this, and I'll definitely buy this. Not recommended for beginning finger drummers, but recommended as some sort of an extra adventurous thing for people who want to mess around with this themselves. And finally, we have the Roger Linn design Linnstrument. I bought this thing a while ago, and I love it, just to be clear. But in terms of like pad sensitivity, playability for finger drumming, I would not recommend you buying this thing for just finger drumming. There are better devices out there. I think the way the sensor system works, it's just not optimal for quick percussive sounds. This thing is very expressive. You can play all kinds of beautiful melodies, evolving things like cellos. So if you're interested in like learning to play melodies, chords, and you want to use a brand new invention to do that instead of like a piano or a regular guitar, yeah, Roger Linn designed Linnstrument. This is going to be the future of electronic music as far as I'm concerned. But it's 1,500 euros, I think. And in a way, the Presonus Atom is a better drum machine. So yeah, just for drumming, I wouldn't get this. But for fun and for creative music making, get this. I love it. I have one, and I'm going to show you guys a lot more videos with this thing in the future. So then before we wrap things up, I want to talk a little bit about second-hand pad controllers and, for example, older machines like Maschine Mk3, Maschine Mk1. I got a lot of questions of people like asking me, hey, can you review a Maschine Mk2 or something? And I tried. I looked on eBay here and I tried to see if I could get a cheap Maschine Mk1 or cheap Maschine Mk2. But what I noticed is that people who sell those things, first of all, you have to buy them with the software, because if you don't buy the software, it gets hard to update the firmware of the devices and you run into a lot of trouble. So then if you find one with the software, people just still want like $150 for them, you know? So yeah, I'm a bit like, yeah, if you're spending $150, why not just get a Presonus Atom, or why not just keep saving up for a Maschine Mikro Mark III and get the warranty, you know, stuff like that. Because I don't know, if you buy secondhand, you never know how much a device is used, because, for example, the pads wear off. There's this ink layer underneath the pads that can wear. So if somebody used their machine for 5 years, then maybe just cleans it and then gives it to you, I don't know how good the pads are. You might have to go onto npcstuff.com and buy new pad sensors for it, right? And open it up and do all that stuff. And then at that point, if you also are paying more than $100 for a device like that, I don't know if it's worth your trouble, right? If it's not better to just save up a little more or go for another cheaper device that's new. Feel free to go on a treasure hunt and find a good device. There probably are a lot of them, but you know, I cannot make any guarantees or tell you like this is what you should go for or this is the best. I don't know. I think the new devices in a way are your easiest and best option right now. To sum things up, a few of these devices are pretty good. All of them are a bit of an exception to like the regular 4x4 16 pad controllers. So yeah, nothing changes of my original recommendation on what normal pad controllers to get. But if you want more pads, you might want to play a melody, or you're a heavy Ableton user and Ableton Live would fit perfectly in your workflow, then you might want to get one of these devices. If you're adventurous, you want to get a Boppad. If you just want to be the avant-garde of electronic music making, and you also have another pad controller that you play drums on, you might get a Linnstrument. However, here's another video that you might enjoy. Over here is a link to subscribe to the channel. You can also visit my website questforgroove.com for free lessons and courses, everything finger drumming. It's great having you around, and see you in the next one. Goodbye.